Golf Central on YouTube, brought to you by the Chrome Soft Golf Ball from Callaway.
Earlier today, Golf Week's Eamon Lynch reported new details on the 2024 PGA Tour schedule that is expected to be released next week, on Tuesday, in fact, at the FedEx St. Jude Championship, which is the first playoff event. The PGA Tour, by the way, told Golf Week that it would not offer comment until its official announcement expected then. So here is what we have learned and was reported by Eamon Lynch. There will be a new, quote, signature series, which features the 4 majors and then 12, quote, designated events, as we've come to know them this year. Now, 4 of those designated events will feature the 36-hole cut. That will be at the Players' Championship, the Genesis Invitational, the Memorial Tournament, and the Arnold Palmer Invitational. But worth noting that those 3 invitationals will still feature limited fields with a maximum of 80 players. Now, next year, no player will be leaving after 36 holes at 4 events. So these are the ones to lose the cut. The AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am, which will be played as a designated event for the first time in 24, the RBC Heritage, the Wells Fargo Championship, and the Travelers Championship. For more on this news, let's welcome in our senior writer from GolfChannel.com. That is Rex Hoggard. Rex, tell us what stood out from this Golf Week report.
Cara, the bones of this schedule had been circulating on the PGA Tour really since May. And when I got a look at that, you got an idea of how much of a heavy lift this really was going to be for the PGA Tour. If you go back a year ago, and the idea was to create a better cadence to the PGA Tour schedule with the invent of the designated events. What they wanted to try to avoid is what we ended up with, say, this year at the Honda Classic, where you had a standalone event that was on an island and it was wedged between 2 designated events. Clearly, that impacted the field at the Honda, the sponsor. They didn't want that to happen anymore. They also wanted to create kind of these mini swings between the designated event swings. That way you give players an opportunity to play their way in. That was a big part of what they were trying to do. And this schedule does that, and does it in an impressive fashion. You look at the one thing that stands out to me is probably the Memorial. And I remember asking Jack Nicklaus specifically about the idea of moving that event to the week before the U.S. Open. It's just a 1-week move, but it's pretty monumental, I would say, because for decades now, that event's been played 2 weeks before the U.S. Open. But now you're going to have that event, a designated event. You're going to have the U.S. Open followed by the Travelers Championship. It's the only time during the regular season you have 3 consecutive designated events, and it's during a time of season. It's going to make the top players, make very, very difficult decisions.
Rex, thank you very much for that. For more, let's go back out to Sedgefield Country Club now and welcome in Todd Lewis, who has been speaking to some of the players. Todd, what is their opinion on this rumoured news?
Well, like Rex was talking about, this schedule has been talked about on the PGA Tour amongst the players and officials for a number of weeks and months. But if you look at that schedule that Eamon reported on, the first couple of months are very, very interesting. Of course, the season is going to kick off on Maui with the Century Tournament of Champions. But then you look at that stretch between the Sony Open in Hawaii and the Genesis Invitational, the 3 non-designated events, the Sony, the American Express, and the Farmers Insurance Open. Now, with this new system in play next season, the top 5 in the FedEx Cup standings during those 3 tournaments that are not already exempt into a designated event will play in the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am. But there sits the WM Phoenix Open. It's a non-designated event. Why is it there in the schedule? Well, because there's so much build-out at that tournament, so many structures around there that the tournament officials couldn't get out of the contracts primarily, so that's where that tournament stays. So what's likely going to happen is that those 3 tournaments that I mentioned, the Sony, the American Express, and the Farmers Insurance Open, those standings in the FedEx Cup, those players that advance to the AT&T, those standings will stay in place, and then add the WM Phoenix Open to determine the top 5 after that tournament that will make it into the Genesis Invitational. So a lot of the details are going to be released next week when the tournament comes, or the tour, I should say, comes out with the official tournament schedule. But then there's the issue of the 3 legacy events having cuts: the Arnold Palmer Invitational, the Genesis Invitational, and the Memorial. Here's what a few players had to say about those 3 tournaments indeed having cuts.
I think we have to abide by what those individuals and their entities want to do. It seemed like that was important to Tiger, to Jack, and to Arnie's team, and so I think they well deserve that right to be able to run their tournament the way they want to.
You know, I sat on the fence about the cut and no cut. I understand why we don't have we went to not wanting to have a cut. We guarantee the top players, the guys that are the biggest draws, are their off-roll days. It allows all the spectators to come out and watch and not have to worry about getting out there on Thursday and Friday, taking off work, taking off school, whatever it may be. So I understand that complete side of it. But I also think there is something about having a cut that means something out here. You know, you can really see, you can tell from, you know, watching somebody, you know, what, you know, kind of stones they have when they're trying to make a cut, whether they care a lot or whether they throw in the towel or not. And you can get a good judgment off a player if when he has a chance to win come Sunday, you know, can he get it over the line based off, you know, trying to, you know, grind out a cut and everything. It just shows some grit in a player. But obviously we knew those 3 events, they had wanted to have a cut. I'm fine with it. You know, I'm just hopefully, you know, I plan on being in those events and participating in it. So yeah, I have no issues with it at all.
Yeah, I think when you have your own event, you're definitely entitled to do what you want. I know I would be that. I'm sure I would be that way if I had my own event and I wanted it a certain way, and maybe the tour or somebody didn't. I'd be fighting it pretty hard too. I mean, when you know, when those guys have done all they have, and you know, they're the one that's put in the time. You know, Tiger, I've seen firsthand how much he does that week, and if he wants to have a cut in his event, I think that's more than okay to allow that, I would say.
And as we know, Tiger Woods is now a part of the PGA Tour Policy Board, and his voice, it's like a megaphone. People do listen. And you may wonder, with these cut events, will the field expand? Will it be 144, 120, 100? No. The PGA Tour will likely have a field around 75 to 80, the top 50 playing the weekend or making the cut. And the tour is saying that those designated events are aspirational to get in, so they don't want to expand the field because you're playing for so much money and so much prestige. Cara?
You know, first off, your impressions on this news, and also noting the fact that this is really the first year we're going to see this January through August schedule on the PGA Tour with this FedEx Cup, or FedEx Fall, as they're calling it, really kicking off, I guess, this year with this kind of bespoke wraparound not wraparound, I should say, this bespoke part of the season now happening really at the year's calendar end. So everything starts in earnest now in January.
I love that. Players love it. And my first few years on tour, the FedEx Cup ended and we played for status for the following year in the fall. So I think that's a very comfortable place for players to be in. But when I look at the schedule going forward for next year, two of my favorite stories from this season, designated events, were Nick Taylor at the Phoenix Open, playing in the final group with Scottie Scheffler, and Jon Rahm, finishing second, playing great, and then Nick would go on later to win the Canadian Open as a Canadian. And I think without the experience that he had in that designated event, I don't know that that happens or not. And the second would be Wyndham Clark playing the Wells Fargo Championship. He won that tournament convincingly. His first tournament win. It's a designated event. It's huge. Goes on just a month and a half later to win the U.S. Open. And so I struggle with the fact that, and there are ways to get in, top 5 in the series, you can finish top 50 to get in all of them, but I struggle to think like Nick Taylor and Wyndham Clark would not be in the designated events this year had they had next year's structure. And I think it is a shame that the tour is trying to hold down mid-level players a little bit, because they've proven many times. Nick Taylor's a 3-time winner on the PGA Tour. They've proven they can do it, and they can do it at the biggest stage. So I think with this much money and everything going on, I think the field should be bigger, personally.